My name is Shriya Malhotra, and I am an artist and researcher based in New Delhi, India. I became interested in studying natural non-toxic pigments in the context of sustainability after I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that affects melanin production in my skin. Human skin is the body's largest organ and protective membrane. It is useful for understanding not just biochemical and physical processes which produce colorants, but also the ways in which pigmentation changes over time due to deficiencies, exposures, and other unseen processes. I began to informally and unscientifically study plant and craft processes, both as a form of therapy and for observation based insight into vitiligo. Skin cells are affected by internal and external factors, including UV and pH levels. Researching pigments gave me insight into aspects of my skin condition. Vitiligo is when the body's pigment producing cells start to die. It may be triggered by exposure to chemicals, heat, or strong sun. Many possible factors can cause one's immunity to fight itself. Climate change, which affects human health, is potentially a factor in contemporary autoimmune disease prevalence. Inherited and environmental factors can trigger vitiligo. Observing the chemistry of pigments in rocks, plants, and in foods led me to learn about phytocolors, photosensitivity, immune-related diseases, and biomagnified toxicity. There is no cure for the condition, and treatments emphasize either repigmenting or depigmenting your skin for uniformity. The combined effect of heat, light, changes in pH, and loss of minerals over time can cause naturally occurring pigments to change. So, supplement your nutrients, especially B12 and D, eat colorful foods, avoid eating or applying synthetic chemicals to your skin, and protect yourself from extreme heat and light. I began handcrafting pigments with mica and sand for texture, and even used my washing machine to understand how temperature affects different stains. Heat changes color, vinegar is a fixative, and there are just so many factors involved in producing and maintaining natural colors. Pigmentation in organisms serves many purposes: camouflage, warning, mating, photosynthesis in plants, and as protection from the weather. They sometimes also reflect nutrients. If we consider why leaves change color in the autumn, the answer lies in the fact that when the temperature cools, chlorophyll starts to break down and therefore reveals other pigments. DIY art and craft processes became a way of coping and of continuing my creative trajectory. It also became a space for me to conduct experimental visual research. I began to paint with non toxic colorful liquids like coffee, wine, beetroot juice from my salads, and the remnants of green smoothies. Celebrating diversity in the natural world is one way of resisting the Eurocentric narratives and constructions of beauty. Another way is by highlighting the unique imperfections as beautiful. I started to look at traditional arts to address my skin and made myself micro batches of non toxic makeup, inks, and watercolor paints. The natural world is full of diverse and unique pigments and pattern examples. I can see how different natural processes undergo transformation over time, physically, in terms of chemical composition, and ultimately aesthetically. In countries of historic resource and economic scarcity, ties with the natural world have often been more symbiotic and sustainable. Food is one easy way of examining pigments and colorants. In India, the tribal Gond painting is one art form named after the use of rice as a binder of the pigments. In this painting, you may notice the bite of the color created by vinegar combined with ash. These are the dark parts where the pigment combination has eaten into the paper. Tones and color gradients change over time. Rather than longevity, it seems that biocolorant research could benefit from exploring natural changes, impermanence, and disintegration of pigments over time. Sustainability may mean adjusting temporarily rather than permanently. DIY paints are one way of being sustainable with zero waste, turning consumption into production by creating colorants. The chemistry of pigments seems to be influenced by the process of combustion, heat, light, and pH levels. Acidity seems to affect pigmentation and its binding nature. Glazing with mineral pigments reveals that color in a bottle isn't exactly the way it turns out after being in a kiln. Exposure to temperature and elements makes colors change. Learning from observing plants and traditional craft processes gives insight into chemistry and the transformation of pigments. Natural patterns in minerals of stones and membranes of snakes, butterflies, and other animals are also worth examining. Over the years, I began combining oils and beeswax with different pigments to create my own makeup, face tints to highlight instead of camouflage my imperfections, and even most recently to make my own paints as a way of expressing my innermost self. Over the years since my diagnosis, I began combining natural oils and beeswax with pigments to create my own makeup, assorted face tints to highlight instead of camouflage my imperfections, and to make my own non toxic paints in an effort to express my innermost self. This is an image of a resist dyed t shirt that used indigo dyeing with wax. Naturally faded over time due to harsh detergent and sunlight, it also became food for baby moths. The pattern of the wax resist painted onto a fabric prevented the color from binding the cotton fibers, therefore appearing white. Understanding this synthesis is important for toxicity and sustainability. Studying the evolution of arts and craft processes helps explain the prevalence of different patterns. It also highlights the problems of adulteration resulting in toxicity and allergies, all of which relate to industrial attempts at synthesizing and making colors permanent, particularly in food, fashion, and cosmetic industries. Paying close attention to the natural world gave me useful insights not only into variations and patterns of color and pigments, but also ideas for creating more sustainably. Observing closed loop principles like zero waste, or simply noticing and documenting variations in color like pink rhubarb stems and the pigment depigmentation. Paying attention to the natural world gave me useful insight not only into patterns of natural color, but also ideas for creating symbiotically and sustainably. By observing closed loop principles like zero waste, or noticing and documenting pigmentation variations from diseases on plant leaves. Paying attention to the natural world gave useful insight into patterns of natural color, but also ideas for creating symbiotically and sustainably. Observing closed loop principles like zero waste, simply noticing and documenting pigmentation and its variations, like the disease on plant leaves, is very important. In my role as a citizen scientist and ethnographer, I found visual research lies at the intersection of human health and sustainability. Studying pigments and colorants sourced in indigenous communities offers insight and ideas for livelihood for those who rely on forests and ecosystems.